According to tradition, there's two ways to train a donkey. Use a carrot or a stick. If you don't get that metaphor, what it basically means is that you use positive punishment or positive reinforcement. Although we would never advocate using a stick and positive punishment to train your donkey, we do think it's really important that you understand about punishment and the scientific meaning of it and the role it plays in behavior. Hello again, and welcome to the Training Tidbits podcast. I am half of your hosts, Ryan Cartledge from Animal Training Academy, and the other half, the one and only Dr. Kat Gregory from Creative Animal Solutions in Australia. Good afternoon, Dr. Kat. How are you?
Hello, Ryan. How are you? I'm sitting in Blairgowrie at the moment, having been for a lovely swim and a yoga session with a good friend this morning, and I'm ready to talk about the dark thing called punishment.
The dark side of the force, I sometimes call it.
The dark part of the quadrant of learning, yes.
It's I'll talk a little bit more. I actually quite like the analogy of the dark side of the force in context.
Well, it's how lots of people think about punishment, I think. Maybe that's a good thing.
The thing about dark side of the force is and I'm alluding to Star Wars here, if you don't know that, and all the Star Wars hype at the moment, is the dark side of the force in Star Wars has this very strong pull. And punishment as well, and we'll talk about this later, has a very strong pull as well because of the reinforcing value to some people of using punishment. So I think that analogy, if explained, fits quite nicely with punishment. But anyway, we're going to talk about that soon. If you haven't listened...
May I just quietly interrupt? I guess the trick is that what we understand in the real world, and there is a real world that we all reside in, reinforcement certainly is essential for our survival. But additionally, our survival and happiness also depends on learning to not do things that have in the past threatened our well-being. So an aspect of learning in the real world is that there are punishing events in the real world that actually help us to learn things. So it is something that we should understand in the scientific sense. So over to you, Ryan. I just thought I'd just pop that in there.
No, it's important. It's like, I guess what you're referring to is kind of like, if you didn't learn not to touch a hot stove the first time you touched a hot stove, then you'd probably touch a hot stove again. So it's pretty important for your health.
Or if you were a little springbok in South Africa and didn't learn that running from a cheetah was a smart thing to do as a calf, you would not survive to adulthood.
You would get a 100% decrease in behaviour because you would not be behaving anymore.
Yep, cheetahs have a 90% hit rate in the wild when they pick you.
Amazing, aren't they? Hey, if you haven't listened to the last episode yet and you're not already there, then head over to animaltrainingacademy.com and you can get access to all the podcast episodes there. And whilst you are there, take some time to check out everything else that is going on that site. I've worked overtime getting it up and running and getting all my content on there for you guys, and it's been live now for nearly a month. The other thing I'm slowly doing is taking all my archive video content and repackaging it into the free Training Tidbits online course. So that course includes all the free videos I have been releasing since the start of Animal Training Academy, and I have additionally added written reports onto all those videos and turn them into lessons and then turn them into a course. So all you have to do is register to become a member, and then that course is yours for free and you can start learning today, start learning now. So head over there. And I'm also making all new content every month that goes up on the site for free. So there's hours and hours of work up there. It's my gift to you. It's a labor of love, and I'm excited because it's never going to stop growing. Every week there's going to be new content up there. So head over to animaltrainingacademy.com, and when you do register, you'll also get added to the mailing list. So all the free content I make, including these podcasts and the training tidbit videos, will get delivered straight to your inbox. You'll get a little piece of animal training content every week. And one more thing, just before we start, on the last podcast, I did say I had an announcement that I was very excited about, and I think I'm ready to commit to formally announcing it. So here goes. I have basically locked myself away for the whole start of 2016 in my house with my animals, building a brand new course from scratch. And I have called this course Clicker Training Fundamentals. And the course goes into depths about the basics of reinforcement, talking about primary and secondary reinforcers, how to create secondary reinforcers and use them with your animals, how, why, and when to use the clicker, and how to know if your animal understands what it means. And it also goes into depth about writing training plans, splitting up behavior, and training and shaping new behaviors. And each lesson has a written report and quizzes at the end as well for further learning, as well as the video content in each lesson. And it's basically for anyone who wants to learn how to train an animal. We focus on the clicker, but the course is designed to let you make the decision whether you want to actually use a clicker or not. The course will actually work for anyone that wants to go from start to finish of training a new behavior. That will officially be released on the 23rd of February. So if you want to be the first to know about it, go to Animal Training Academy and register on there, and you'll get added to the mailing list, and you'll be the first to know. Plus, I'm going to offer a special limited time offer for those who are on the mailing list. I'm still working on the final details of what that offer it is going to be, but it's going to be awesome. So head over to animaltrainingacademy.com, click on the registration button and start learning now. But we're going to move on and we're going to be talking about punishment. So if you did miss the last podcast, then this is part 2 of a 3-part series where we are talking about consequences of behavior. The last podcast, we did a really broad overview of reinforcement, and we haven't actually quite finished that discussion yet, because in the next episode, we're going to be inviting a guest onto the show and we're going to be talking about negative reinforcement in that episode. But this episode, like I said, we're going to be talking about punishment. And I know, Dr. Kat, when we were talking the other day, you mentioned that you thought this was important because sometimes this topic kind of gets swept under the rug a little bit and it's not discussed maybe as much as it needs to be.
No, I think that what we should remember is, I think that a lot of us have an emotional response when we hear that about punishment as part of learning theory. And I think what we have to remember that there is a scientific definition of punishment as well, and that it is a part of normal learning in the real world. So I think that we should understand it scientifically, how it can be used, how effective it can be, and then equally understand that there may be, particularly when we're talking about using positive punishment in teaching, how there can be significant secondary fallout as a consequence to that we must take into consideration if we are considering ever utilising punishment in what we do. And I must admit that I use punishment in my training sometimes, and the component of learning in the learning theory that I utilise is negative punishment, where I'll actually remove myself from interaction with the animal. But that we'll go into in a moment. But I think, first of all, if that's okay, Ryan, I might just define punishment.
Yeah, definitely.
So we know reinforcement now is the application of a consequence to a behaviour that is like that. It increases the frequency and the strength of the target behaviour. Now, conversely, punishment is the exact opposite of reinforcement, and the definition goes as follows. It is a procedure of providing consequences to behaviour that reduce the strength and the frequency of that behaviour that it follows. And there are 3 characteristics. It must have, the behaviour itself has consequences, and the consequence here is that the behaviour is decreased in strength. The reduction in strength must be the result of the consequence, which is the punisher, for the thing that you have applied or removed to be punisher. And there is positive punishment, where we add something to the environment, usually an aversive event to the animal, and that decreases the behaviour that we're targeting. And negative punishment, something is taken from the situation, consequently decreases the behaviour it follows. Now, when we're talking negative punishment, that usually the removal of whatever it is from the environment is usually something the animal would normally work for to keep in its environment. And so by removing that as the consequence, the behaviour is reduced in response to that removal. Most people recognise positive punishment as applying something aversive to the animal. So if a child's potentially drawing on the wall at home and mum sees that, immediately as the child is doing that behaviour, comes up and smacks the little kid on the bottom, and as a consequence of that behaviour, the little child is again not likely to perform that behaviour, then the mother has effectively punished that behaviour. It doesn't always work, because the problem is that we haven't taught the child what we actually want. We've told the child what we don't want it to do, but we haven't actually taught it what we do want it to do. So we have to remember all of these things so that we actually want to shape behaviour in the general direction that we want to go. We don't want to just say, no, don't do this, don't do that, because the little animal or little child will stand there and say, okay, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do this, so what can I do? And that's where the role of positive reinforcement comes in, or negative reinforcement comes in, to show the child what it is that you actually want, or the animal, whatever little being you're working with at the time. Do you have an example of a positive punisher that you are familiar with, Ryan, at all?
This one we talked about at the start that everyone can relate to is that example of touching a hot stove and having the pain added, the heat added, and the decreasing the frequency of you likely to touch a hot stove for the vast majority of people in the world.
Yep. So that basically there are some good aspects to punishment that can be preserving for the organism as well. So the environment in that setting has actually punished the person for touching the stove, such that in the future that is much less likely to happen. And then, of course, the consequences to touching the stove are being burnt and then causing some distress ongoing go into the animals. So there is a positive aspect to punishment, i.e. you don't want to continually burn yourself. Yeah.
So it's important for all animals to have punishment in their life to learn what not to do and avoid those severe punishes, including death. Did we talk about the example of a cheetah? Was that at the start of this podcast?
No, I was talking about it during it. I mean, for a springbok or a little impala in Africa, it is important that the calf learns to flee quickly from the little spotted cheetah as it's stalking you, because if it doesn't learn to go away from predators quickly, the reality is that that little animal won't survive to adulthood to reproduce. So the aspect in that situation, the animal will run from the potential punishment of being caught by a predator.
So it's negatively reinforced for running.
Yes, but it's also potentially if it's been bitten or slapped by a cheetah.
For sure.
That's a positive punisher. And in that situation, the animal's less likely to want to be near a cheetah in the future.
So for that springbok, that's life or death.
Yes, absolutely. So there's a couple of things going on in that situation, obviously. And most of the time, there are lots of things going on in every situation. Positive reinforcement, positive punishment, these sorts of things can occur at the same time in one learning context. So I guess all we're trying to do is make sure that people understand the scientific definitions of both reinforcement and punishment. Punishment simply decreases behaviour, and in essence, reinforcement increases the behaviour. So that's how we need to think about it.
And to think about the fact that punishment saves springboks' lives and stops you from being burnt, then that scientific understanding of it, it's a pretty good thing.
There is a value to responding to being punished sometimes from the animal's long-term welfare. And likewise, I suppose, when we have with humans and some animals with self-injurious behaviour, positively punishing that self-injurious behaviour has aspects, and actually in some scientific papers, but positively punishing the animal for offering that behaviour and then consequently positively reinforcing the person for offering alternate behaviours. That is an effective way of managing that behaviour. I think there is some value sometimes. I think what we also need to consider as part of what we do every day is that it's not just about the science of learning and how effective it is, but how we ethically want to approach each of the contexts that we engage in with our animals. And I guess the ethics do come into it, but not necessarily in the scientific aspect. I guess science can teach us that punishment can be effective and that it can facilitate learning, but then likewise science doesn't talk about ethics, and that's where we as human beings come in, and we have to ethically decide how it is that we want to create our relationship with the animals with which we work. So 99 times out of 100, I would encourage everybody to always think of ways to manage behaviour that are positive rather than reaching straight away for considering punishment as a way to stop behaviour that we don't like.
Yeah, and I feel maybe in those scientific papers there's going to be quite a deep understanding of how punishment's being applied and how it's being correctly applied. Because if it's not correctly applied, as I'm assuming it was in those experiments, then there probably would have been some other significantly probably negative side effects. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that additionally, if we're considering utilising punishment for learning and for teaching, you have to understand that there are negative consequences to utilising punishment. And I think underlying it, there may be a disruption in the relationship between you and the animal. And that matters to me. That matters to all of us, how the animal looks on you. There are other obvious aspects of that are problematic with using punishment in teaching. Have you got that? You've got those listed in front of you too, Ryan.
Yeah, I just wrote a couple down, so I've got 4 listed here. One was so punishment can lead to increased aggression. It can lead,
can be directed towards the trainer. And it can be, if the animal can't actually reach the trainer, it can be directed towards an innocent animal who's actually in the enclosure with you. And that's pretty scary and unfair for that other animal.
Yeah, aggression is one of the most, hugely significant undesirable behaviour. So we don't really want to be implementing training interventions where we've got increases in aggression.
And then the other thing, another consequence to punishment is that the animal may choose to try and run away in that situation. And actually, by running away, might run, for instance, if you're training a dog and the animal tries to run away from you, the punisher or whatever's being punishing, the animal may in fact run on the road and get killed or injured seriously. And the other thing that the animal, sorry, go ahead, Ryan. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I use positive punishment, and me and you were talking about this the other day. We've got 2 cats, and our cats, we live on a busy road, and for that reason and other various reasons, the cats are house cats, but we do have a big outdoor yard that we're currently converting into a big outdoor enclosure for them. So they're going to have 24 access eventually to both indoor and outdoor spaces. And because that's currently in construction, the cats are going out every day, but we are out them consistently supervising them at this point in time. However, they're crafty, they're clever, and they learned the spaces where they could get over. So I had to grab the cat. It jumped on top of the fence, and I took my attention off it for a split second, and it got up. And, you know, I went in and I grabbed it on the scruff of the neck, and I picked it up and pulled it back in because the main road's there. And these cats, they haven't been outside. They don't know what a road is. They don't understand. And obviously in a novel situation, if they get startled, they could run quickly. And the chances of that happening might not have been significantly high, but it could have happened. So in that situation, you know, with a risk of death, like you just suggested with that dog, I did act, and I took a withdrawal from the trust accounts, as we say. You know, that animal's not going to probably like that experience, but luckily for me, that animal knows that I'm a provider of pleasant and predictable events 99.999% of the time. So I can take that one role, and it's not really going to affect, or it doesn't affect at all, the relationship that I have with that animal. And that's an important aspect of having that trust account and having that good relationship with your animal, that you can, when you need to, especially in a life, you can take
the odd withdrawal sometimes. But if you don't want to meter out punishment as a constant story within your relationship, I think, obviously. So,
and then your animal is going to be trying to escape and avoid you, which is what you just mentioned.
Yeah. And then one other aspect of punishment that can positive punishment particularly can be that animals actually, there can be an overall reduction in the animal offering any behaviour, particularly when punishment seems to be a regular part of interaction with you. So you're constantly waiting for animals to make, in inverted commas, a mistake, and then applying positive punishment to stop that behaviour. What can happen in that situation where any behaviour seems to be contingent with punishment is that the animal can reduce its overall offering of any behaviour, and we can get to a point of a state of learned helplessness where the animal feels that no matter what it does, it can't avoid punishment. And that's an animal that tends to not do anything in its environment because it doesn't feel that anything it offers can be offered without the aspect of punishment. For punishment to be effective, you have to think about 3 aspects. For it to be effective, it must be contingent on the target behaviour. Remember that it cannot be and contiguous with the target behaviour, so it must be closely associated with the target behaviour. And thirdly, for punishment to be effective, it has to be offered and meted out at the right intensity. And if 1, 2, and 3 are met, and the behaviour actually decreases in its frequency and intensity, then the definition of punishment has been met. So that if the punishment is contingent and contiguous with the behaviour and offered at the right intensity, as a consequence, the future offering of that behaviour is reduced, then you have effectively utilised punishment in the teaching of that animal. So that's the 3 things you have to remember. There's no point in offering punishment that is of not the right intensity, and as a consequence, the behaviour is not reduced. It's better to actually, if you're discussing positive punishment in a situation, it must be meted out at the perfect intensity such that the future of that behaviour is reduced. The problem sometimes with positive punishment is that the punisher can be quickly reinforced for performing that behaviour, and there is a possibility that in that reinforcement of the punisher, that the punisher may then use more and more punishment in the teaching of animals in their care. So I think what we then have to consider is that there are ethical considerations. Science can tell us that punishment can work in teaching, but what we need to do is that just because we can do something doesn't mean that we should. And that's where we as human beings can come in and consider what we're doing. That's why people come to me as a consultant when they have a problem. And most of the time, for instance, there's a simple thing about dogs barking. And an easy thing to do is to fit a dog with an electric shock collar. And the consequence to fitting the electric shock collar is that the behaviour of barking is often reduced. The problem is that we haven't thought about what is the reason for that barking, and the problem also is that if the dog is barking because it's anxious at being separated from its owner, by simply punishing the barking behaviour, we're actually increasing anxiety, not reducing it.
Right.
So we're actually making things worse for the animal and not improving overall what's going on for that animal in that environment. So but unfortunately the behaviour of punishing the animal is actually reinforcing for the punisher, because the complaints from neighbours are usually reduced. What we have to consider in the training transaction, that we very much focus on using positive reinforcement as our primary tool, because just because we can punish an animal and help it to learn, there are, I think ethically, and I know you as well, know in our hearts that we shouldn't use punishment as our primary tool in teaching. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. The other thing that everyone should remember, that if you have used punishment, so if you say, no, I don't want you to do that, and the behaviour then is reduced in its frequency, what you immediately must do to make that learning more effective for that animal in that context is to offer it an opportunity to be reinforced for behaviour that you do like, that you do want to increase. So that's important. So you say, no, I don't want you to do this, but yes, I want you to do this, 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 and this. And make it so that the animal then understands that there are a variety of behaviours that I can do that for which I will be reinforced positively. And then you will shape over time an animal that offers the behaviour that you do want. And the problematic behaviour will often just disappear all by itself. So often, I don't often punish a behaviour. I actually spend a lot of time differentially reinforcing behaviours that I prefer. But if you have needed to use punishment, then immediately offer the animal an opportunity for reinforcement in a behaviour that you will reinforce. That's the effective way of doing it. I guess you've got to choose appropriate punishment for the procedure. Timeout, of course, is what we discussed earlier. It's appropriate for a problem maintained by attention. It's not useful for problem behaviours maintained by escape. So if you have an animal that prefers not to be in your presence and you offer time out as what you think is a punishment, it's not going to be effective for that animal that doesn't like you.
So how would someone measure that? How would someone know that?
You would know that timeout wasn't effective in that situation if the animal continues to offer the behaviour that you are trying to punish. So that's the important thing. If you've applied punishment in the context and then go back into that same context and the animal continues to offer the problematic behaviour, then your punisher that you have offered previously has clearly not been effective. So that's the journey forward for everybody in training, is that you must always review what you've done. And so, if you're, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say as an example, and give me your feedback and input on this. The prison system, like repeat offenders going in and doing their time, whatever, and then going back out, and then offending again, and then going back in and coming back out. And if there's no strategies in place to teach these people different skills,
what you prefer,
is that similar?
That's an example. I agree. Yeah, that's an example of of incarceration not being effective. So that's why I think most progressive prisons tend to try to teach behaviours while the person is incarcerated that are better for both the person and society in general, so that on the release of that human being, if that person comes out with a range of skills and talents that have been nurtured while they've been incarcerated, they are less likely to become repeat offenders. That's important. That's the aspect that's important for us to know.
And do you think, like, let's say that, you know how contingency is so important, that
yes,
with punishment and reinforcement, the consequence has to happen immediately after behaviour, and with things like prison, quite often it doesn't. Or with we talked earlier, maybe before we started recording this podcast, we talked about speeding fines, where you get caught speeding and you get a fine later in the mail. Let's hypothetically say, in your opinion, if a prisoner did an offence and then immediately miraculously they just went to prison straight away, do you think that would have a greater effect? Do you think it's because prisoners aren't making that connection in their mind, and it's because it's not contingent on their behaviour?
Well, it is contingent on the behaviour, but it's not contiguous with the behaviour.
Contiguous
so it's fast,
is the word.
Yeah, it's just it's just definition of words, but it's contiguity. So that unfortunately, often in the incarceration or the punishment of losing money and paying a fine is so far separated from the original behaviour you're trying to punish, it's often not going to reduce the future offering of that behaviour. So it's much better, it's much more effective if the policeman stops you, chases you down and stops you and finds you on the spot than if you actually get the letter in the mail when the camera is finally reviewed and then finally you're sent a punisher in the mail. The problem also is that you have done probably 5 or 6 or 7 or multiple hundreds of behaviours in the meantime on the road that are not related, but you're punished ultimately, and it's unrelated to the behaviours that you've been offering on the road. So,
however, and I just moved from Queenstown where there was hardly any police, and living back in Wellington, there's just significantly more police around. And in Queenstown, I don't think I saw a single speed camera the whole time I was there. If I go on a 10-minute ride here from where I'm living in Tawa to the closest city, which is Pororua, I basically always see a police car, if not 2 or 3. That's how much more police there are.
And you want to avoid interaction with the policeman, I'm supposing, and you are behaving better on the road as a consequence, I'm guessing.
And I know where they hang out, and I know where they sit with their speed cameras. So that punisher being added into the environment there has decreased the behaviour of me speeding.
The potential punishment, the thing that you want to avoid,
when I see a cop car, especially if it's following me, I just have this feeling. It's not a nice feeling, just because of the experiences, I guess, with police in cars.
So you work to avoid that.
Oh yeah, I've got escape avoidance behaviour. I haven't done anything bad. I'm not running from the cops or anything. It's just, when you see flashing lights behind you, even if it's not you, you kind of get that, you miss a heartbeat kind of thing. And when I see a cop on the side of the road with a speed camera, I'm like, I quickly look at my thing. It's kind of like, I feel that decreases my behavior because I'm like, was I speeding? Especially when I go past a speed camera. Not that I'm actively speeding, but I'm not always paying attention to the speedometer all the time.
So everyone should remember, if you are applying something in your training, the most important thing that you must do is collect data and review what you have done. An appropriate punishment should cause a rapid decrease in the problem behaviour. If it isn't, then maybe it isn't actually a punisher for that animal in that context, or perhaps you are not implementing punishment correctly and the behaviour continued to be reinforced potentially by other things in the environment that were stronger than the effect of punishment. The point of what I'm trying to talk about is, if you are applying punishment in trying to reduce potentially problematic behaviour in an animal, you must review what you're doing, because if you're not getting what you're aiming at, then please review what you're doing. Don't continue down the punishment route if it isn't being effective. You have to think about why it is that what's going on is not actually, the animal's not responding the way you want. Don't continue down that route. The potential for, particularly if you're utilising positive punishment in the face of the problematic behaviour, don't keep thinking that if I apply it harder and harder and harder, it'll work at some point. If it's not working immediately, then rethink rethink what you're doing. And that's
Cool.
equally important when you're applying reinforcement in your training.
I think to add to, and this kind of just sums up everything you've just said, and also talks about effectiveness and effectiveness not being enough. And as you talked about earlier in the podcast, the ethical aspect has to come in. And therefore, if it's effective but it's not ethical, then it's not really okay. Yeah, but this is from a document from Dr. Susan Friedman, and I'll put a link to that in the write-up for this podcast as well. And full credit obviously goes to Dr. Susan Friedman for writing this document. But she says the following behavior analysis standards appear desirable for all behavior-related professions. Protect the participants' welfare at all times. Use interventions that are custom-tailored for each individual. Design interventions on the basis of a functional assessment of the problem behavior. Use only procedures for which there is a scientific basis. Use scientific methods to implement and evaluate interventions, e.g. collect pre-intervention baseline data and ongoing treatment data until the intervention is terminated, which is just what you're highlighting and alluding to, and it being super important to analyze whether you're actually having an effect in the right way and the desired way. And she also goes on to say effectiveness is not enough when it comes to choosing and applying behavior change interventions. Borrowing from the field of applied behavior analysis with human learners, an explained hierarchy of procedures is proposed that adds a second criteria to effectiveness: relative intrusiveness. Without this ethical standard, interventions are likely to be selected on the basis of convenience, familiarity, speed, or blind authority, and may inadvertently produce the detrimental side effects of punishment and learned helplessness in our animals. So that's
I agree, Ryan. So I think the science of behaviour can demonstrate clearly that punishment can work if it's used effectively, and it can show that punishment can alleviate suffering in some individuals, particularly when we're talking about trying to stop animals from performing potentially self-injurious behaviour. But I guess what science can't tell us is whether what can be done should be done, particularly this is an issue when we're talking about applying positive punishment in teaching. And I think just because we can do something doesn't mean that we should. So given that information, certainly punishment can be considered a rational part of training. But if we would prefer to consider that we would like to, in every problem, go down the positive route to influence behaviour that we want, what are some alternatives to utilising punishment? One is managing the environment, so response prevention. So for instance, this can work quite well when you bring a new puppy into your home, which Brian, you are going through right now. Instead of waiting for the puppy to do naughty things like chew power cords and things like that, what you are quickly doing is puppy-proofing your house.
Puppy-proofing not just the house, the entire property.
And the puppy, I'm presuming, is teaching you that there are things you didn't even imagine that you would have to manage in your environment. But it's about setting up your animal for success. And that's where, for instance, also crate training a new puppy or many animals comes into it, because you're actually preventing it from doing stuff that you might not like. That's where we're not using punishment. We're just managing and setting up the environment so that the puppy is most likely to offer behaviours that we want.
Yeah, and obviously
we're on the right track.
Yeah, we're gonna get one of those big kind of metal inside crates, like one of those huge ones.
Yep, very useful.
We currently have one, and you can buy them really cheap offline, the soft crates.
Yes, you can.
And I modify mine. I get a plastic lid from a big storage container and just attach it with zip ties to the bottom, because the bottom is quite flimsy, but they're not expensive, and they're very large and spacious. So we've already had the puppy going in there as well. I think I actually left a little sliver of chicken in there from training the cat to go in there. So the puppy was unexpectedly
reinforced with that you wanted.
Yeah, I was like, yes.
Okay.
So yeah.
And then, okay, sorry, Ryan. And then the other thing that we can do to reduce the performance of the animal offering problematic behaviour is apply the process of extinction. And the definition of extinction is that you withhold reinforcers of the problem behaviour, such that the behaviour, then there is no reinforcement of that behaviour. So in theory, that problem behaviour should decrease in its offering. There are issues with that, and I guess what you can get is what we call an extinction burst, where you actually increase the intensity of your behaviour before there's a reduction in the offering of the behaviour. So you can, when I have made a plan of attack and we don't, I've got a problem animal, problem dog in the house, and it's been jumping up and being reinforced for that, because often puppies get attention for jumping up. And I say, okay, so if you don't want the behaviour, then stop reinforcing it. So what can happen as a consequence, and I always warn my owners this, is that you might initially get an increase in intensity of the behaviour, because in the past that behaviour has been positively reinforced, and the puppy goes, well, in the past it's worked, so I'm going to try harder and harder and harder. So you do always expect an extinction burst before you get a drop off. So you've removed the reinforcement, you will often get an extinction burst. The other problem in that situation too is if we're only using extinction to manage behaviour, is that you can get an emotional outburst from the puppy as well, or the child. So suddenly, for instance, this is where you get the little tantrums in public. The child will throw itself on the floor and scream blue bloody murder and cry and do other things, or basically, or lash out. That's the other thing that the pup can do. There could be increase in with the frustration, so an increase in potentially aggression. So how do we avoid that problem is when we actually combine extinction, i.e. removal of reinforcement for the problematic behaviour, and then differentially reinforce behaviour that we do want. So that we know scientifically is a very efficient way of managing problematic behaviour. So there's one, response prevention by managing the environment. Two, considering using extinction, i.e. removing all reinforcement for that behaviour so it disappears. And additionally to that, differentially reinforced behaviour we want. So that's in essence all behaviour modification in 3 points. That's it. That's all you have to know.
And I think when you read the early studies about extinction bursts, and they were done with little mice in Skinner type boxes, and the mice would push a button and a piece of food would come, and then they were extinguishing the behaviour, so they'd remove the food delivery for the push of the button, and the mouse would come up and push the button a couple of times, walk away,
and they'll do it even,
yeah, and it'll come back and they'll just push the button, push the button, push the button, push the button, push the button. And I remember when I first learned about that, I had quite a humorous kind of picture in my mind of that extinction burst of that mouse, and I was applying one at the time. So this is when I was first starting to train, and I was applying one with an eagle that was reaching out and grabbing my glove very hard, and I was positively reinforcing just with little pieces of mouse, calmly putting its foot onto my glove. But I remember that extinction burst of that eagle. There was just
so try it even harder, I'm guessing, because in the past it worked. Yeah.
Boom, 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 just hard and fast on my gloves, just gripping and stomping,
and
then it was gone. And the thing about extinction is though it's never gone. Like it did come back, and we'd had to kind of take a step back and reevaluate it and go back in again. But it left from 95 to 99% of the time that behaviour decreased down to zero. But quite a nice learning curve for me as an early young trainer, and just learning about extinction bursts, and then having an experience with that eagle and seeing it right before my eyes.
You can expect it. And so teaching the animal what you want, not just stopping behaviour in its tracks, but teaching what you want. That's the key.
Yeah, so just to recap, I guess, what you said, you want to figure out what is reinforcing the behaviour you don't want, and you want to remove that reinforcer.
And then remove the reinforcement for that behaviour, and then teach what you want.
Yeah, and then figure out what you want, and then reinforce that behaviour.
Actively,
actively, and there's a few different strategies which you just went over with regards to how you can implement that intervention.
Yeah. I just want to make sure that everyone understands what functional analysis of a behaviour is about. What we want to do is look at the stage on which the animal is performing and try and ideally work out exactly what is it that is reinforcing that behaviour to maintain it. When we start manipulating behaviour, you need to work out what the reinforcers are, because if we're going to employ things like extinction, we need to be able to remove the reinforcers from the environment so that the behaviour is no longer reinforced and it becomes extinguished. That's the important aspect. So it's a bit like after you've done a show with your animals, everybody should have a training meeting afterwards to go through everything that's occurred, and then if there have been any problems, work out what they are, analyse the journey, make a plan, and run forward in a better way for the next performance. So it's exactly the same as that. That's why I like training meetings immediately after shows every single time. So the third aspect of managing problematic behaviour when we're considering alternatives to punishment is differential reinforcement. And the underlying effectiveness of differential reinforcement is contingent on its combination with using extinction attention for the undesirable behaviour. So what is differential reinforcement? It is actively reinforcing behaviour that we prefer. So if I say, I'm no longer going to reinforce a puppy for jumping on me anymore. So I think that the functional analysis of that behaviour is that behaviour is maintained because I give attention to that puppy. So how else can I manage it? I'm going to actively reinforce the puppy for not jumping. So incompatible behaviour for jumping is sitting on my bottom. And alternatively, I could just simply teach the animal to nose touch, to target my hand. So there are a couple of little behaviours that I can teach a puppy that I will actively reinforce while I remove all reinforcement for jumping. So the puppy may still jump on me a little, but I will not reinforce it. If I can, I'll quickly, as the puppy runs to me, I'll quickly cue behaviours that I prefer and actively reinforce those so that the puppy learns that if I want attention, if I am near a human, if I put my bottom on the ground, I am very likely to be reinforced. Does that make sense to you, Ryan? I'm guessing you're going through all of this learning stuff with your little puppy in your household right at this second.
Going through it with all the animals at the moment.
Shaping them into your new environment, I think.
Oh, yeah, we just the cats are just doing so well, and then they're just introducing, obviously, that new element changes everything. So it's a lot of fun. Yeah. It's a lot of fun for me.
Stimulus in the household. This little puppies offering myriad behaviours.
Yeah, I mean, I'm loving it. And don't mean to say that in the wrong way because there's undesirable things occurring. But
you have a lot of opportunity to practice what we're talking about now.
All day, every day. I mean, I've lost half of my day, my work day, but that's fine. I love it, and I'm just sitting there watching everything unfold before me. And yeah, I love that. But that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm figuring out what those undesirable behaviours are, and we've only had the puppy now for not even a week, only 5 days. So I'm trying to learn what the reinforcers are for that puppy, and trying to figure out exactly the behaviours I want. I'm training it to play tug at the moment. I'm training it to play fetch as interventions for a little bit of pillow chewing and pillow humping as well.
Interesting.
We're doing a lot of training, playing with various toys at the moment. Yeah, so basically implementing everything you've just said.
The other thing that people always complain about is puppies biting them. So, for instance, how are you, Ryan, dealing with that issue with your puppy? Because all puppies explore the world with their mouths, as you might
really had the issue of
you haven't had it. Maybe that's been already managed actually at 8 months.
The undesirable behaviours are humping at the moment. There's a lot of climbing on the furniture, but it's a really small dog, and me and my partner have decided at this point in time that we're okay with this. And the other behaviours are a lot of chewing on hard plastics and pillows and humping the bed. So the main focus of my training right now is getting the puppy chewing on other things.
That's right. So if you want to use your mouth, this is how you can use your mouth that I find acceptable.
And I had dog toys, and my mum, bless her, brought us a tug of war kind of rope toy for a large dog for our cats for their Christmas.
That's great. What a good mummy you've got.
Yeah, she's fantastic. But the cats haven't really utilised it. So I was like, okay, cool. Let's, we can utilise this with a young puppy. But we got it targeting the toy, and then it wasn't offering a behaviour opening the mouth. So I found something that I knew it liked. I had this little teddy bear from when I was a tiny little kid, and it was sitting on a shelf, and it showed interest in this teddy bear. So I'd throw this teddy bear around and it would mouth it, and then I'll reinforce that for that. So we're playing, I don't care about this teddy bear. We're playing tug with the teddy bear at the moment. We're playing fetch with the teddy bear. And I'm going to generalise that over into the dog toys that I kind of want her playing with, which is one of those is a rope, and we're going to obviously get other toys along the way. And we went out to the supermarket the other day and bought a Kong and a few various dog toys. So that's what I'm working on at the moment in terms of trying to extinguish the behaviour of humping pillows. But
so you're providing a lot of other behavioural outlets so that the humping behaviour isn't getting paid and not being offered very much because we're busy doing other things.
And having only lived here for 5 days, the puppy, I'm still learning its function, and I'm starting to, even after 5 days, predict likely occurrences of the behaviour.
When it's going to happen, yep.
So I'm still at the very early stages of that, but even after 5 days, I can predict, hey, this time is a time where I've seen the puppy do it, frequently. So being ready at that time with an intervention, which is these toys, and I can focus training and everything around that, and have the toys present and remove the stimuli that seem to promote the behaviour. but being very conscious that if I do that, then I need to replace it with something else.
Yeah, so you're saying, I prefer not that, and I'm not going to reinforce it anymore, so I'm giving you, and I'm providing you a range of behavioural outlets that will give you the reinforcement that you received previously from that behaviour I don't like. You're actually making the new range of behaviours at least as reinforcing or more reinforcing for the puppy.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the reinforcer for the humping is yet.
It's self-reinforcing in part, and it's often maintained by attention.
Yeah, that's what I figured. I
figured
that the previous owners, I mean, this is a theory that I come up with, so this is obviously can be tested by removing that reinforcer, that the previous owners had given the dog attention. Whether, they thought that they were punishing the animal, i.e. trying to decrease its behaviour or not, I'm not sure. But often
people find it quite amusing, and so there's a fair bit of attention given initially to really increase the intensity, and then the animal often discovers that it's a self-reinforcing behaviour as well.
Right. Yeah.
Which is okay, but we want you not to perform this, and it's okay to do that sometimes, okay, but it's not entirely what we would prefer you to do in public all the time. We give you other things to do.
It would be a hard thing to completely eliminate reinforcers for, because we have friends frequently come over and they're going to see her humping, and they're going to either find it amusing or probably direct attention to it in some way, asking what she's doing and watching her and looking at her and focusing their eyes in her direction and all that kind of stuff. So it's an interesting one, and it's undesirable, but I look forward to working with her and seeing if we can modify it, decrease that.
Sure you can. I'm sure you can.
So it's going to be fun, and listen in, keep listening, and I'll keep coming in with updates on how that's going.
Yeah, and so it's not just, and I guess that's the other thing that's to remember with regard to that situation, we can't remove all reinforcers because part of that behaviour of humping is self-reinforcing. So what I would like to do is to give the animal a whole lot of other things for which one will get lots of attention, so that the day is just so full of other yummy things to do that doing the humping stuff isn't really thought of that much anymore. So it might still occur at low frequency, but it's not occurring at the great frequency that it is now. So that's the way of dealing with it without, one, punishing the puppy, and two, we understand that we can't remove all reinforcement for that behaviour, and it will probably still be practiced, but we're actively creating a puppy that understands that it can do a lot of other things for stuff that it will be reinforced, for which it will be reinforced. So that's the way to go. I agree with you, the way you're managing.
After 5 days, it knows 2 things.
It probably knows a lot more, actually.
Oh, yeah.
How do I manipulate my family? I'm so cute.
And it is rather cute when it's playing tug of war, and I've got a nice little I've got videos of all that. So I got videos of the humping as well. So we'll do a bit of a case study on that eventually. So one thing that we haven't alluded to too much in this podcast is the fact that for the person doing the punishing, they're actually going to be reinforced for their behavior by getting decreases. If that's what they want, if they want a behavior stopped and the behavior stops, consequently, they're reinforced for that behavior. So an example I have is one thing that I've seen multiple times on the news in New Zealand is farmers breaking their cows' tails. So these are dairy cows going to the milking shed, and imagine the cow standing outside and it's not moving. And a dairy farmer wants the cow to move inside. They want them to stop standing still. So there's been instances where the dairy farmer has gone up and they've broken the cow's tail, and that stopped the cow from standing still, and the cow's moved forward and gone into the shed. And some of the cases I've read, they've broken up to 200 tails of cows. And why did they do it 200 times? Because it got the behavior they wanted, isn't it? And it stopped the cow from standing.
And the other thing that I could probably just mention briefly is maybe they've seen their father do that before to the cows on the family property as well.
So it's all too easy, and it's used absent-mindedly as well. So yeah, I mean, the thing is, you see it around you, don't you? Not just in your father and your family, but also we talked about speeding fines before. I mean, we punish as a society as well.
True, and I think that's another of the I guess that's what we need to remember, is that there are fallouts with regards to punishment. One, that the punisher is reinforced for his or her behaviour. Additionally, we might then see that behaviour repeated in following generations of trainers because they are observing us using that method in our training. So that's a risk. I think certainly science can tell us that punishment can be utilised effectively in training and get outcomes that we might desire in training, but then we've got to consider how we as trainers want to perform ethically. And that's where our choices as a human being comes into play. Does that sound all right?
Yeah, and I guess with the cow example, we've deemed it unethical as a society because it's illegal to do that, and the farmers that they got punished in the end by being prosecuted. I'm not sure if they got fined or they got jail time. But sitting in court, those people knew that what they'd done was wrong. You could see it on their face, and they knew they'd made unethical decisions, but they were reinforced for doing it. So at the time, they having no alternative strategies in place, and possibly seeing others do it,
having seen other generations perform that behaviour and seeing it to be effective, that is why maybe they started performing that sort of behaviour on their animals under their care. So there is a risk of imitation of the punisher as well in future generations of trainers if it's deemed to be effective in that context, in that environment. And that's a risk, I think. Okay, you can use punishment if you apply it properly and it's meted out at the right intensity, but then we've all got to step back and think, okay, the science doesn't tell us anything about how to behave ethically. Science of behaviour can demonstrate that punishment works and can be used effectively. We now know that. It can show that punishment can alleviate suffering in some instances where behaviour is self-injurious or potentially life-threatening. But science can't tell us what can be done, should be done. And that's particularly an issue when we're discussing physical punishment. So I think we've got to step back and consider how we want to proceed forward as trainers of animals and people in the environment in which we live and work. And that's where we have to consider that what we do should be ethical as well as scientifically valid. But what science doesn't teach us is about what is ethical, and that is where we have a choice to make. This is the point at which we make a choice as a trainer. We can choose, and what I would hope that all of us choose is that we value the relationship that we establish and maintain with the animals under our care. I do not want animals to be fearful of me. I want animals to welcome me into their environment. Every day I see them, I want them to look up at me and know that when I'm around or when you are around, Ryan, that everything is usually a good thing for them. Everything works well for them and everything feels good. So emotionally, they look at you and think positive thoughts. And that is what I want us to all understand. Certainly we understand now a little bit more about the science of learning, but now we have to proceed forward in a positive fashion and ethically. God, now my dog's yelling. Hang on, I've just got to grab Rumi. Hang on. Rumi, come. Rumi, come. Rumi.
Okay, well, on that note, Dr. Cat, with your dog Remy going off in the background there, hope everything's okay. We might. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, there's just a gentleman here looking at a tree that's fallen down in my front yard. So I've just introduced Remy and everything settled down right away. So we're all good now. The animal is okay and the human out the front yard is also okay. So that's good too. So we dealt with that positively. Good boy, Ruth.
I think my partner just got home as well, and I've got to go and intervene with hopefully not any humping, but with animal management right now.
Yes.
That's Phoebe the dog humping. And so we've got to wrap it up there anyway. I think we've kind of touched on a lot of topics today and a lot obviously moving forward as always with these podcasts. But I know, Kat, you and I always talk about this. We want to know what you want to know, so let us know and we'll do our best to let you know the answers. and
Absolutely. I think in the future, Ryan, what we've probably realised is that it'd be really lovely, I think really quite useful to actually run a specific podcast with regards to everybody's questions with regards to what we are talking about in respect to learning theory. So I would request, and I'm sure Ryan as well, is if you can send him in some specific questions, we would aim at answering them in a specifically tailored podcast in that area. Yeah. Does that sound good, Ryan? A Q&A session.
And you don't have to contact me. You can also contact Dr. Kat if maybe you're more familiar with her. There are numerous ways to contact us. I've told you about my website, but you can also contact Dr. Kat on creativeanimalsolutions.com and on Facebook. As we always say, we're pretty active on Facebook. Dr. Kat has her Creative Animal Solutions page, and I've also got the Animal Training Academy page. So, yeah, we'd love to hear from you. Fire us those questions, and we will aim to do a podcast where we answer them. So you might hear your specific question on this podcast. And anything else you want to add, Dr.?
No, I just think that the interaction would be really fun. So please do ask questions. I think it'll be an entertaining session at this. I think it'll be blah, blah.
Cool. Crikey. We'll end up there. Hey, head over to Animal Training Academy. Like I said, sign up for the free course and look out for the new course coming out soon. Send us your questions. Let us know. Say hi. Tell us if you like the podcast. Tell us if you don't like the podcast. Just say hi.
Tell us everything and ask us questions. We are here. That's why we're here.
And we'll see you next time in part 3 of the series, where we're going to be inviting a guest onto the show, and we're going to be focusing on one aspect of reinforcement, which is negative reinforcement. So it's been a pleasure as always, Dr. Kat. Thank you for your time today, and we'll talk then.
Lovely, Ryan. Thanks. Bye, everybody.